Hello and welcome once again to the Newburyport Documentary Film Festival's Watch Club, January 2023 edition. It's a new year. Happy New Year, everybody. I am Program Director James Sullivan. We are honored to have the director of this month's Watch Club film with us, Reed Davenport. He's the filmmaker of I Didn't See You There, which just premiered on PBS's POV series. Hopefully, you've had a chance to watch it. If not, we will tell you in a minute about how you can still stream it on the PBS website. For those of you who maybe haven't had a chance to watch it, or maybe to refresh your memory if you watched it a little while ago, let's take a look at the trailer and then we'll come back and talk to Reed about his film.
I hope this is my last personal film.
Please welcome to the Watch Club, Reed Davenport. Hi, Reed.
Hey, James, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm glad we watched the trailer again because it reminds me. I mean, I watched the film when it, last week when it premiered on POV. Which congratulations, by the way, for having that happen, and congratulations for all the acclaim you've gotten for the film at Sundance, etc.
Thank you.
But the trailer does such a nice job, and it's all throughout the film, I think. But the sort of rhythmic sound of your chair, and then incorporating the drums with that, it just makes the whole thing feel so fascinating and compelling. Do you want to tell me, maybe for starters, do you want to tell me about the use of the drums and how you chose to work that into the soundtrack of the film?
Yeah, I'd love to. So, originally, like a lot of filmmakers, a lot of pretentious filmmakers, I wanted to make a film without any music.
Mm.
And then the editor touched it on us and said, well, if we use music, let's try to make it so it's not manipulative, but rather it augments the visuals. And Todd is also a musician, and he has this robust library of songs.
Yeah.
So not only did edit the film like a song, he also picked the music that really blended itself into the soundscape that we were already working with.
Yeah, I don't think there's any other instrument, right? It's just drums, right?
Throughout the whole movie.
Yeah.
No, there's actually quite a bit of music.
Oh, okay. So
I guess that's the average, but it's yeah, there are about 8 or 9 songs, I believe.
So I guess it's just the power of the drums and how well it integrates to the story that's what stuck in mind for me.
I guess so, yeah.
So the first actual question that I want to ask you You know, a lot of folks who we've pointed, you know, obviously lots of folks came to your film for the first time, whether or not they're watching us now, by watching it on the POV premiere last week. And for those of you who haven't caught it yet or want to tell your friends, the film can still be streamed on the PBS website at this URL that you see on the screen for the next month or so. Reed, am I right? Is that what you told me?
Yes, I believe until February, early February.
Right. And then they kind of switch over to next month's feature, right?
Yeah.
But so if anybody wants to, if anybody saw the film and or wants to tell their friends, it's a really powerful piece of filmmaking from Reed's perspective, obviously. But my first question for you, Reed, is I want to hear about the first time you saw the film with an audience.
Wow. Yeah, it was actually very powerful in unexpected ways. I'm glad you brought this up. So we premiered at Sundance, but it was virtual. So
Oh, okay.
we didn't get to experience that live feeling. And
Because Sundance was still virtual. Did you premiere 2 years ago or was it last year?
a year ago, it went virtual because of Omicron.
Right.
So we actually had our in-person premiere at True Falls, in Columbia, Missouri.
Yeah.
And I had been at True Falls. I had just gone there with the fellowship right before COVID. That was my last travels before COVID. Actually, Tribeca got canceled when I was at True Falls in 2020. So, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, did you get to meet, did you talk with Robert Greene at True Falls?
Yeah, so I did this boats panel this year where I was able to screen some of my other work.
Oh,
So when I was at True Falls, um, so so for this year's True Falls, I walked in. I'm sorry. For 2022's True Falls, I walked into the theater and I realized that I had seen a series by Steve Jobs in that theater um, 2 years ago,
huh.
and
Right.
it was very it was hard to describe. And it was a full house. It felt like there were millions of people there, and it was an incredibly surreal experience.
So the thing about seeing your, that's why I wanted to ask you this, the thing about seeing your film with an audience for the first time after sort of, you know, spending endless hours editing it and looking at it, at the footage and all of that, right? Is that you kind of sense, you get the first taste of whether the audience like is comfortable feeling the same emotions that you're hoping they feel while
Yeah.
you're, you know, while you're cutting that, while you're editing the film, right? So like there's moments in the film where people get angry with you, you know. There's moments in the film where people might be laughing along with you, right? Like, you know, or just feeling awe at, you know, the your perspective, the things that you're seeing, you know. Did you feel that? Did you feel like the audience was sort of getting it in that way?
Yes, I think the most tangible thing that I hold on to is that the producer Keith Larson and Todd is when people laugh.
Hmm.
And when people laugh at certain parts, we feel that that's a victory. And it's also surprising to hear when people laugh at parts that we didn't expect laughter from. So that's kind of the barometer we pay attention to. Not because we care so much as it's just very interested to hear where audiences find humor in the film.
Exactly. Right. Like for instance, when you're telling the guy to move his stuff when he's in your alley, right? And it,
Oh yeah, nobody's ever laughed at that.
right. Yeah. So I mentioned Robert Greene. We had him. He's a great filmmaker, and he makes. He's the. I think he runs the or helps run the documentary film program at the University of Missouri, right? And
Yeah.
which puts on the True False Festival. We
Yes.
had him on this on the Watch Club with Procession, which is his most recent film a year ago. So you told me before we came on. Folks who've seen the film know that obviously you shot it while you were living in Oakland, but you told me that you no longer live in Oakland, right? So tell us where you are now.
I live in Brooklyn. I moved to New York a little over a year ago to be closer to my family. As I like to say, if you watch a film, my mom won the film because she got me back on the East Coast.
That's right. Your mom won.
Yes.
Right. So for those of you who have seen the film, you know that Reed grew up in I guess it's southwestern, right? Connecticut,
Yeah.
the town of Bethel, which obviously we're in New England here in north of Boston. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up and what you did during those years while you were still, at home with your family growing up, in terms of art. Like, so at the beginning of the film, I think you say you moved to Oakland to figure out how you were going to be an artist. I'm not sure that I might be wrong, but I'm not sure that you knew you were going to be a filmmaker. You just knew you wanted to be some kind of an artist. Is that right?
No, I was speaking directly to filmmaking.
Okay.
But I decided to be a filmmaker after college. Years removed from living in Bethel. But specifically in high school, I actually was drawn to arts, specifically photography. I never thought it would be something I would pursue, but there was the inkling of artistry in high school.
Yeah. Right. Where'd you go to college? Did you go to?
For undergraduate, I went to George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
Yep. And you went to grad school as well?
I went to grad school at Stanford, which is why I ended up in Oakland.
In Oakland, right.
Right afterwards.
Right. You mentioned photography and you talk about Diane Arbus in the film. Yeah. Was she, kind of was her work? I mean, obviously we know that those of us who know about photography know that her work was supposedly about, in large part about supposedly quoting shooting pictures of the quote unquote freaks in life. I think she saw freakdom in almost everybody to some extent, but was her eye and the picture and her sort of, body of work a big part of your thinking? I mean, you certainly talk about her in the film.
No, absolutely. Now, I think that quote was so juicy or so pertinent to what I was getting at. The ambivalence throughout the quote, the unabashedness of a quote, the acceptance of a quote. I mean, there was just so much there, but no, I actually never did all about that.
Right. would when you were shooting photographs, who would you say were some inspirations for you? Anybody in particular?
I would say kind of um there are the people who worked for the album. I'm thinking at it, but like the Walker Evans, those sorts of people who were working under the Federal Work Administration
Yeah, right.
and documented the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl and what have you, and poverty throughout the country.
Yeah, right. Those are such beautiful pictures. Dorothy Lang,
Exactly.
Walker Evans. Right, exactly. So, folks, we're encouraging you, if you want to ask Reed a question of your own, if you type it into the comments box that you're looking at on your screen, we can pose the question to Reed if you so choose. And I should also remind you, maybe at this point, that it might be a good time to click the little bell at the top of your YouTube screen to subscribe to the Watch Club, so that you can find out about our future events and when we schedule a filmmaker every month. So we'll let you know when the next interview is going to happen. So Reed, I love that a lot of the quotes, some of them are in the trailer, but anybody who's reviewed the film has sort of noted, it's the film sort of, I think the term has been used a few times, the avant-garde quality of it, but more like the poetry of the film. Um, because it's shot from your perspective, do you see it that way? And do you feel like you have kind of a poetic eye for your surroundings, that comes through in the film?
I think it's an approximation of my perspective. It's completely different than my little perspective. I mean, that that's basic photographic theory where you can never mimic reality,
Right.
or at least that's what I think. I think I think perhaps the poetry that people may see from it has at least something to do with the fact that they haven't seen this type of photography before. So I'm not sure if I have a poetic eye, but it's the premise of the shooting is um different than most um photography you would see.
Absolutely. Right. Um, do you so you in the film, you sort of make a point like, I don't want to be on camera. This is going to be shot from my perspective, right? You're not going to be looking at me. You're going to be looking at what I see, right?
Yeah.
Um, was it easy to stick to that kind of edict? Like, was it easy to say, I made a rule and I'm sticking with it?
As an isolated group, our team it was, but whenever we solicited feedback, that was the note we got most is they wanted to see me. But it was very important for us to point out the continued subjugation of disabled people, as well as allow people to really be able to kind of think of themselves in my perspective.
Right. At what point would you say, maybe it was way before you started making this film, I don't know, would you say that you've become politicized about the issue of disability?
I think I was 20 or 21 when I was making my first film, and I was meeting all these groups and reading books and thinking about how disability is not really an individual medicalized condition, but rather it's a group of people who are discriminated against in similar ways that really kind of blew my mind and also alerted me to the fact that there's so much there is so much just inaccessibility that
Hmm.
makes living with a disability more difficult than it has to be.
Right. Um, have you seen? I was thinking in terms of other films about. There have been a few good ones about disability. I would assume you've seen Crip Camp.
Yes, I actually did a tiny bit of work at Kirkgate
Oh, did you really? Okay.
as co-director Jacob Pratt is a good friend.
Oh, nice. Okay. Uh, so we all know that I have a hard time even saying the name of that film because
He
it's
did
not
that.
okay.
He did that on purpose.
I know they did. Um, but it's such a great film. And for those of you who are not familiar, I think Crip Camp was made about 2 years ago. It's incredible footage of a summer camp for disabled folks from about 40 years ago, 50, maybe even 50 years ago, 70s, right?
Yeah,
And then so there's this incredible footage that they had from the summer camp, and they're all
yeah,
young people. They're sort of
yeah,
like teenagers or young adults.
yeah.
And then several of them went on to become some of the most important advocates for disability rights in the country, right? So I had no idea that you had a chance to work on that film.
Yeah. In fact, I can picture this. I remember 5 or 6 years ago sitting in a cafe with Jim, and Jim was telling me that all these people from his camp um, went and participated in this sitting of the Hill building, and there were all these people, and he was going to make a film about it. And I thought, if Jim is not exaggerating, if this is all kind of true, not that I didn't believe it, but like as filmmakers, we frame things in certain ways. I thought if this is all true, this is going to change the way we see disability history. Yeah, it was all true.
Wow. So do you think that your film has managed in its own way to affect people, people who've seen it similarly to the way that that film did?
I think they're so different, but I also think they complement themselves. So it's really hard to say. I think Quick Camp opened the eyes of a lot of people, and it allowed this film at least a little bit more wiggle room to fundraise and get in that house.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They kind of complement each other. They're different, very different versions of um, a similar statement that both films are making.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang on one second. I have a okay. Here we go. We have a question from Gene in Lunenburg. Reed, do you feel that any progress, using that term loosely, has been made in the areas of more accessibility in general for people with wheelchairs and more understanding by the general population at large?
Yes, but I don't think it's significant enough. I think um, the United States still remains largely inaccessible, even 33 years. It'll be 33 years in July since the American Disabilities Act was
Right.
passed. People still see disability as a medical condition that needs to be solved or treated by the medical powers that be. And as long as we don't see disability as a political uh, identity, then we will never see the progress that we need to.
Right. Um, Jean had posted a couple of questions. It was a long question. And then her last thing, no, the third thing, Steve, she said, it is a great film. Great film. Yeah,
You buried the lead.
exactly. Right. Exactly. We buried the lead. Um, so in the film, we're sort of, part of watching the struggle of day to day living for you in Oakland. Now you're in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
Is it any better, any worse? I mean, I can't imagine New York is particularly easy to navigate for you.
The subway is a joke. I
Right.
mean, like 25% of the stations are accessible. Oh,
Wow.
yeah, it's amazing.
That seems like that it would be, I want to say illegal. Like, doesn't the ADA, yeah, they have to be compliant, don't they?
They are constantly getting sued. What they say is since they were built before the ADA, they say retrofitting it will cost more than 10% of the value of each station. So that's how they avoid retrofitting.
Ugh, right. So what's like they just tell you, well, you got to go to the next station?
You gotta know where you're going.
Right.
That's for sure.
How about sidewalks and, restaurants and things?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, America is inaccessible. It's you gotta go on ahead and do your due diligence. To me,
Mhm.
that's not accessible.
Right. But if you're going to be, political about it, you might as well be in the biggest city in the country, making that, working towards making them more compliant. Right.
Sure, I mean, there are people in the community who are activists who are doing work, and accessibility is only one. I do see one small part um, of disability issues. We have health care issues. We have um, people with multiple identities who are marginalized exponentially more via police violence, medical coercion, educational equity. I mean, all these things, you know, it's a really holistic challenge.
Right. Um, I asked you this before we came on live, and I think I'm going to ask you again before we wrap it up today, because I think it's important. You told me what the film is that you're working on now,
Sure.
and can you tell the folks that are watching, the folks that'll see this interview, you want to tell us a little bit about what you're working on now? You're the director of your next film, and it's not about you, right?
Right. Thank God, right? It's about how society tolerates death among disabled people at a disproportionately higher rate.
Mm,
And this can be seen through assisted suicide, medical coercion, and medical malpractice that goes unprosecuted.
wow. Right. So pretty deep and powerful subject.
Yeah,
How far into it are you? Like, when do you have a deadline for yourself?
we're looking for 2024 years.
Right. Okay. So then we'll have you back here in in a year and a half.
Right, yeah, I would love that.
Great. Um, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, Reed. I think I'm glad on your mother's behalf that you're back on the East Coast.
I will tell her.
And maybe we'll see you. So maybe we'll see you sometime soon in New York City. But in the meantime, best of luck with the next film. Congratulations again on all the great recognition for I Didn't See You There. Folks who are watching, if you have seen it, you know how powerful Reed's film is. Tell your friends and family. It'll be streaming on the POV site for another month or so, and then after that, Reed tells us that it'll be available on the normal streaming platforms, right? On Amazon and Apple, etc.
Yeah, Vimeo, yeah, stuff like that.
Right. So, you know, if you've got friends and family who love a good documentary, let them know if they haven't seen this one. Reed, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. And we will see you sometime soon. I'm just going to take a moment to thank our sponsors, as we always do. And we'll see you next month in the Watch Club. Thanks again, Reed.
Thank you.